Hello and welcome to today's Missio Nexus webinar. I'm Heather Pubels, the founder of Leitmotif, a communications consulting firm and Missio Nexus member organization. I'm partnering with Missio Nexus to discover topics and find effective presenters that can address ways mission agencies can improve their marketing and communications efforts. Before we get started with our webinar, I want to let you know that Missio Nexus has a cohort called Communications Director and Staff. If you are involved in marketing or communications with a missions agency, this cohort is for you. It's a place where you can meet, learn from, and be encouraged by others who do similar work to you. At the end of this webinar, I'll give you further instructions on how to find and sign up for that cohort. Okay, for today, Liam Savage of OneHope will be presenting our webinar entitled, Know Yourself and Know Your Audience. Liam and his wife, Patti, live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where they both work at OneHope. The mission of OneHope is to reach the next generation with God's Word. Liam serves as their Director of Innovation. He is also on the leadership team of Indigitous, a ministry network that seeks to empower Christians with digital solutions to confidently tell others about Jesus. Liam is a passionate learner, teacher, and organizational culture builder. His work touches on marketing and communications in several areas, including his recent participation in creating a new marketing strategy for Indigitous. Remember to please put your questions in the chat panel as you think of them once the webinar gets started. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can. Liam, it's great to have you here with us today. Welcome, and I'll hand things over to you now.
Thank you so much. It is a joy to be here. Thank you for that generous introduction. I am excited to talk about helping you express your brand as you think about engaging your audiences and growing them. It's hard. It's really challenging as you think about this space. We operate with a lot of competition, and I think it's hard sometimes when you think about competition that we're not just competing against other ministries. Like, we're not competing with ministries. We share the same mission and vision, but our competition is oftentimes secular media companies like Disney or Netflix, like people who are competing for the attention and the minds and shaping the beliefs of the people that we want to reach and serve. And so as you think about how to communicate effectively and build an audience, I wanted to share some wisdom, some things that I've learned the hard way that hopefully you can learn the easy way from this webinar. So let me start, and I want to start with a quote from Sun Tzu. He's the author of a book called The Art of War, which was written a long, long time ago. And he says, if you know your enemies and know yourself, you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. If you do not know your enemies, but do know yourself, you will win one and lose one. If you do not know your enemies nor yourself, you will be imperiled in every single battle. So let me translate that a little bit into audience terms. If you know your audience and know yourself, you will not be imperiled in 100 engagement attempts. If you do not know your audience, but you do know yourself, you will probably have lukewarm engagement. And if you do not know your audience nor yourself, you will be imperiled in every attempt to communicate. So this is humorous, but I think we take it for granted that, of course, we know ourselves. Of course, we know our audience. And I want to help break down some of the assumptions behind how we might not know exactly ourselves as well as we think we do, and we might not know our audience exactly as well as we think we do. So I want to start with a video, an example. So let me show you this. And all right, so I hope you guys are emotional like I am. Hold on, I think, yeah, let's stop this. It's repeating. So as you guys think about Always, it's a brand that men literally can never use, but whatever they sell, I would buy it. Like, when you think about understanding your audience, they're solving the real problem, like a universal thing that all girls struggle with, that all girls go through. And when you think about this, it's really powerful. I don't know. So when you think about understanding your audience and communicating a message that impacts them, I think most of the time we talk about ourselves. We're talking about like, oh, this is what we offer you, and hopefully you like it. But rarely do we start connecting to our audience and the things that they really care about and the things that are really important to them and solving their problems and addressing their thoughts and concerns. And so as you guys think about engaging people with the gospel and communicating what your brand does, it's really important to say, why are you different? I think if you were talking to a church pastor and you said, what is the purpose of your church? They would say something like, to create a community where people can have an authentic experience with the gospel and with other believers. It's like, okay, that's great, but how is that different from any other church? How is that different from um, the hundreds of churches in your city, probably? You just described church, not your church, not what makes you different, not what you stand for, not what you are connecting to someone specifically about. And so I want to help us today to think about some of the tools that'll help us create messages that can really powerfully connect with people in ways that go deeper. So here's our agenda. Introduction to the session. That's what you just got. Congratulations. You're 25% of the way done. I want to talk about knowing yourself. I want to talk about knowing your audience. And then I'm going to try to introduce you to some practical tools. So let me get started. So the next section is knowing yourself. So connecting with others requires that we share our story. And story is about the significance of our work, not just numbers, specifications of our programs and products, how many people we're reaching. It's about the why we're doing what we're doing. Simon Sinek has a great TED Talk about the power of why, and he compares Microsoft to Apple. And Apple will open with a question like, we believe that people are creative and should do more and accomplish more, and we want to help them do that. And it's like, okay, wow, that's powerful. We want to think differently. Like some of their ads are just really emotive and powerful, and it usually has nothing to do with computers. They're starting with why they exist as a company, to help people think differently, to empower creatives, to unleash potential. And then he talks about how they go about doing that. And the how is by building beautifully designed and intuitive and natural to use products. It's like, okay, what they actually do then is it flows out of the how, and it's that they build great computers. Microsoft starts, on the other hand, by saying like, we build computers. And you're like, okay, great. So thinking about the order of starting with why, being really clear on your why, it's a lot harder than you think. When you get to why your organization exists, we would say for the Great Commission, to spread the gospel. It's like, that's why all of our organizations exist. Why are you trying to spread the gospel? What are you trying to accomplish with the gospel? How will someone connect authentically with your ministry over hundreds of other ministries? Because that's what they're going to connect with, is the why you exist. We all exist because of the Bible and the Great Commission, but there's a purpose in our work beyond that, in addition to that, and helping people relate to it and sharing what you're passionate about. It just requires a level of self-awareness that is, I think sometimes we take for granted. And so one of the tools that is helpful in this process is called the problem priority matrix. And when you think about this, you sort of work your way across from left to right. And so when you start with the unmet need, this is like, what is a need that someone feels, something that someone is struggling with? And then as they struggle with that, what are the barriers or problems that prevent them from meeting that need? And then what is our solution to that barrier? How can we help them overcome that problem? And then the audience is who feels all of that? Who's the solution for, who experiences that problem, and who has that unmet need? So just a quick example, an unmet need is transportation around the city. If I'm on foot and I really want to get from downtown New York to uptown New York, a taxi might be expensive. They don't always accept credit card. Maybe they're not always available. So a solution, if we're talking about Uber, would be that a platform to empower drivers to pick people up with transparent fares and low hassle. That's really nice solution to that particular barrier. And if you think about the audience for that, people who travel often, people who are likely to have a mobile phone, you can think about defining your audience more specifically. So let me switch from an industry example like Uber to one that's more ministry specific. So let's talk about an unmet need of church attendance declining, especially among the younger generations. Okay, that's a challenge that a lot of pastors are facing. What's the problem? What's the barrier? Why is that happening? Pastors don't really know where to start. The generational attitudes and behaviors are changing. There's not enough time to find and try new things. There's a lack of capacity and staff and resources for experimenting or even knowing how to begin addressing that need. So solution might be to empower younger generations to help lead and direct ownership, that they would feel ownership of the ministry. If they're not being engaged, help them feel engaged by being empowered. And so when you think about that, that solves the lack of capacity. That solves, it gives you more time to try new things. And I bet the younger generation has a whole lot of ideas about where to start as far as how to engage their peers. And so the audience for that is pastors. How do we help make them aware of the capacity, the latent capacity that they have not yet unlocked because they haven't created pathways to engage the next generation? So when you think about this, you're really helping to define. I think a lot of times when we have solutions or programs or things like, we put it in the solution category and we're like, this is a great idea. We're going to go ahead and pursue this. We're going to print this book, develop this program, launch this thing in this country. But we haven't yet done the full work. And a lot of times when I ask people, it's like, great, I've learned about your program. What problem is that solving for who? Like, who feels that problem? There's oftentimes silence when I ask that, that they're doing it because it's a good thing to do, but they haven't necessarily met a need that someone has. And you can build all the programs in the world, but unless someone feels like they need that program, unless it's solving a problem for someone, any communication about it is going to feel really irrelevant. And you can't craft your communication about what you do unless you know what it's trying to solve for someone. And so having that clarity and doing this work to really understand your why and what your programs are doing is just, it's really helpful. It's helpful work. So I want to talk a little bit about audience. So this is knowing yourself still, but it's knowing who you're for. And I think this is something that I'm going to pick up on this example here for pastors. So I've heard this so many times. People say, oh, we're trying to reach pastors. We want to build a pastors network. We want to engage pastors. And I'm always driving for clarity. I want us to have a really clear idea of who are we really serving with when we say pastors, because that can mean a lot of things. And it's hard to be for a really big, broad, diverse audience and be effective at the same time. And so I know it's really challenging in ministry because we say the gospel is for everyone and we want to serve everyone in the whole world. But if you're trying to serve everyone, you're really going to have a hard time connecting with anyone in particular, because no one will feel like you're speaking to them specifically. It'll be kind of like you're muttering to yourself on the street and it's like a busy street and there's lots of people passing. They're going to think you're like a crazy person. I don't know. That's a bad example. But it's like if you're trying to engage with someone, it makes much more sense to point someone out and say, hey, you, yeah, you, I've got a question for you, rather than just talking to yourself. So how do you do that? That hey, you, making it feel like a message is directed at you. When you think about how to engage, so let's dig into this example of pastors. So when someone says pastors, that can mean a lot of things. So maybe it's a lead pastor versus an associate pastor versus a youth pastor, or children's pastor, executive pastor, missions pastor. Each of those has a very different set of concerns, different levels of authority, different degrees of autonomy. And there's also this idea of small church, medium church, multi-service church, multi-campus church. Already with just those two dimensions, like speaking to a lead pastor of a small church would probably be very different from speaking to an executive pastor at a multi-campus church. And so who are you addressing? If you're speaking to all pastors in general, a lead pastor of a massive church is not going to receive your message the same way. And so these are just two examples, but let's dig into it a little bit more. There's local churches, there's international churches, there's majority world churches and first world churches. There's the age of the pastor to consider. There's the language. Are you trying to reach English second language or non-English speaking? Do you want someone who's seminary trained versus informal training versus no training? Or we can keep going. Next gen versus church planning versus outreach. Like, what are they passionate about? Where's the church located? Is it urban, rural, suburban? Are they open to collaboration with other churches or are they not? Um, how long have they been a pastor? Are they relatively new or relatively experienced? Are they in their native country or are they a missionary sort of pastor? Have they tried something new recently in response to COVID, or are they resistant to change and just hoping things go back to normal? So it's like I could have kept going and had twice as many post-it notes as this even, but I ran out of space. But what I want to show you is that no matter which dimensions of these you pick on, it's a very different way that you're going to craft your message. They have very different concerns. And if you're generally saying like, we want to reach pastors, you're going to have a really hard time making any of them feel like you're for them. And it's okay to be for someone and not everyone. If you're for and very powerfully impacting, let's say, majority world, small church pastors who have less than 5 years of experience, and you are very powerfully communicating and serving them, others will see that and want to be a part of it too. Um, you have to be able to communicate effectively to build an audience and grow an impact. Um, Depending on who your target is, the better you are able to communicate to them, the more impact you can have, the more of an audience you can grow, and the more influence you have, the larger your audience, the easier it is to attract people who are maybe outside of that very narrow target. And so I think it's counterintuitive that you have to focus on a very small audience segment to be able to grow success at engaging those before you can start attracting and engaging more. So knowing yourself is about knowing who it is that you're trying to reach, and knowing why you're trying to reach them, what their problems are, and how you're trying to solve them. So that's all about yourself. I want to talk about knowing your audience. So we say we finished the segmentation and we know who we're trying to reach. When it comes to knowing your audience, I want to talk about three things. The first is building a persona to really understand the person that you just identified, that pastor. I want to talk a little bit about the digital space, and we'll talk about influence as well in that space. So when you're building a persona, there's a few categories that I try to build on. The first is inner life, and this is what are their dreams and goals. Tools like an empathy map, like understanding what are they thinking and feeling. Um, how well do you understand their inner life? Because if you can speak to their goals and dreams, that'll help you engage them better. This goes back a little bit similar to the problem priority matrix that we were doing earlier, but what are the actions that they're trying to take? What are they trying to accomplish, or what are they trying to accomplish those dreams? What are the barriers that they're running into, the struggles that they have as they try to accomplish those dreams? And if you understand those specifically for that audience, it helps you direct your message at, we're solving this problem for you. Another category is perceptions. Like, what do they expect of us? How do we stand apart? I've gone into so many meetings, and it's helpful to have this persona that we build up and say really specifically to who I'm talking to, speak directly to the expectations that they have of us. Like, we want to serve you in this way because you feel this pain and we want to help you overcome that. It just makes communication very clear. Whereas typically I would have gone into that meeting and talked generally about what we do with no really regard to who they are and what they particularly care about. And so speaking directly to a person and what their expectations are is just really powerful. The last category is connection. So what's a good first step for them to get involved? For this particular persona, what is the one thing that you want them to do to help set them on the right journey with you? When you think about what should this person feel with when engaging with us, so many people would say like inspired, empowered, heard, known, understood, loved, like all of these sort of powerful emotion words. Um, and so then when you look at a website or an email campaign that goes out or anything that's a part of their first impression, um, are you capturing those emotions? Are you helping them feel that when they engage with you? Because if not, then you need to fix something. You need to address the way that you make them feel understood and known. And it helps you sort of direct your efforts and target what you're doing. And what should we do to help them stay connected? Like, where are they going to fall off, and how can you make sure that they don't? What are going to be the areas where they lose interest, and how can we sort of anticipate ahead of time and be prepared for that to address them? I think, when we're addressing personas and we're talking about how to engage with people, um, a lot of ministries offer things for free, which is great. But I want you guys to know always that there's a cost, no matter what. Even if something is free, there's a cost. So here are some of the costs that you'll have to deal with. Um, these are barriers to action, and I would remember these. I would spend some time to memorize them, and then when you go into a meeting or you're planning something, if you write these on the whiteboard, you'll look really smart. Um, Time. So how long is this going to take? Someone, if you're asking someone to do something and it takes a lot of time, they're less likely to do it. Money. So if we're offering it for free, that's only one of the barriers. There's physical effort. Like, you want me to go what? Go where? You want me to do what? How? That is, if it takes physical effort, that's not super fun. Mental effort. So this is another one. If this is helpful, especially in thinking about communicating your brand, you want to be really targeted in your messaging and really clear about your why and what problem you're solving so that it takes less mental effort. You want to lower that barrier as far as you can and make it really, really, really simple for them to understand what it is that you do. Because even if you can get someone to come to your website, they're going to give you about 7 seconds of attention. And if your loading time is longer than 4 seconds, 3 seconds for your page to load, your fancy video, the one liner, it's like, then you've got only 3 seconds to engage with them. So it's like, if you're not capturing their attention and being able to communicate really effectively in just a few seconds, they're not going to stick around. The level of action that they're willing to take, anyone, is really low. Another one is these last two are really important when you're thinking about the gospel and Christianity. Social deviance. My friends don't do this. My culture doesn't do this. I don't know any Christians. How do you address this idea of social deviance, that people want to be like other people? And then the other is non-routine. I've never done this before. This isn't a part of my routine. With non-routine, I try to think of it in terms of if you think of someone's day as like a timeline, and there's real estate on that timeline, 5 minutes is a calculable percentage of someone's day. Um, and it's like you're trying to get into their time. You're trying to get real estate on their schedule. And if you're adding something to their routine that is foreign to them, something that they've never done anything like it before, they don't have like a category for it. It doesn't fit anything. So when you think about an example, I'll go back to Uber as an example. With Uber, people take taxis all the time. So providing something that fits that category, this is a faster, easier, more convenient to pay, more transparent way of doing taxi service. Great. That fits into a routine that people, at least pre-pandemic, would be traveling to an airport, go to a new city, take a taxi to their hotel or to wherever they're going. So that fits part of their routine. So as you think about your programs, the way that you're engaging with people, where is it fitting in their routine? Is it, or if not, how can you help make it a part of their routine? It's just something to be aware of as we're trying to encourage people to do new things. If you can fit it into an existing part of their routine, it's really helpful. All right. I want to talk about your audience and a little bit about the difference between digital and physical. Um, I think a lot of times we put a lot of stock in the physical experiences that we create. Um, and it's hard when you think about digital because digital is so intangible. Websites often I see have not been updated for a couple of years. The copyright date at the bottom is out of date. The content is stagnant. Um, if you reach out for help with an email on a contact us page, you don't get an answer for a few days. I think as much as you can equate digital and physical, or even give more priority to digital, that's going to be where most people interact with you. That's going to be where most people encounter you. And if you're thinking about serving people and giving them an experience that makes them feel known and valued and understood, prioritizing digital is really powerful. I mean, imagine try to treat your digital experience like it was a physical experience. I think one example is to think of things like um, the difference between a product and a service. When I think about a physical product, it's something that you can finish and it's something you can put on a shelf and sell. You know if a product has been successful or not. Like if your toaster doesn't function, then it's a defective toaster. But an experience is different. An experience or a service, it's harder to evaluate. How do I know that um, my doctor has done a good job? I don't have the expertise to evaluate his service, and I'm not going to be able to go to another doctor the same day and evaluate. Or if you think about a restaurant and the level of service that they provide, we all know that when we've received poor service, like if you have to wait on hold for 4 hours or you show up at a desk for hotel check-in and there's no one there, it's like you don't want to create that sense of bad service online. So I think anything that's digital, you should treat it more like a service. And I think the best example is a restaurant. With a restaurant, you staff a restaurant in a particular way. You have a hostess that greets people at the door. You have waiters who make sure everyone has what they need. You have a chef in the background who's making the food. You have to supply food to the restaurant on each day so that they have what they need to prepare the meals. Like it's ongoing, and every day there's always more work to be done. There's always more customers coming in that need to be served. Um, and if you have that service mindset, that's what digital is like. I mean, people come to your website each day expecting something new, expecting to be served, expecting to be able to interact with real people. And if someone interacts with you on Facebook or Twitter there and you don't reply, it would be like walking into a restaurant and there being no one there. There's no waiters to help you get seated. There's no one to take your order. It would be like the lights were off. And and if you walked into a restaurant like that and it was empty, you'd be like, well, this place isn't active, I guess, and you would go somewhere else. And so a similar thing happens online. If someone shows up to your Facebook page and or your website and it's out of date and there isn't new content and things are stagnant and stale, it's just like they walked into a dark restaurant and they're not going to feel like you're even real, like you're taking it seriously. And so as you think about digital and physical, really try to combine the two because people are bringing the expectations of service that they have with every other company um, to you, and they're expecting the same level of treatment. And so back to that idea of competition, like you're not competing with another church or another ministry. You're competing with the best of the best. The internet makes everything equal. And so, in the same way that you can reach out to Coca-Cola on Twitter and get an answer in minutes because they have a team of social media people who are engaging and talking and listening, that's what people are expecting of us. And it's hard to compete on the same stage. But if you don't even know that you're in that same game, it's even more difficult. So know your audience and know what they're expecting of you so that you can meet those needs. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of product versus service. So with a product, there's a high upfront cost and low maintenance cost. You've built it, you've produced it, you're just printing more or giving it out. It's easy to replicate, it's easy to scale. And I talked about, easy to quantify success. With a service, there's a lower upfront cost, but then the ongoing cost is continual. A digital product never ends. An app, unless you take it down from the app store, is always going to be there. Your site is always going to be online. So preparing for that and creating that experience is really critical. I think I meant to have this slide up while I was talking earlier, but that's okay. I want to talk a little bit about technology as well. There's a misconception around technology that is, I think, dangerous. One is that technology scales access. When you scale access, we have this perception that through Facebook, through Instagram, through YouTube, like we have access to everyone in the whole world. And it's true, we have the opportunity to engage with anyone everywhere. But that doesn't mean that we have the ability to scale relationship. Relationship does not scale. Relationship is still one-on-one. Relationship is a matter of building trust and building influence. It takes time, it takes intentionality, and you can't really cut corners with relationship. And I think when we talk about engagement, that's a relationship. You're wanting to build a relationship with people. You want them to feel known. You want them to know you, and so as you are planning your capacity and you're thinking about how do we engage people better, you have to think of it in terms of how am I building a relationship? How am I prepared to know people, hear their story, and share mine? There's a great book. It's an old book, but it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And he talks about ways of building trust and ways of changing minds. And some of these are, I think they're just helpful. So let me just go through them. So when you build trust, 6 ways to make people like you, he says, be genuinely interested, smile, remember their name, be a good listener, talk about their interests, make them feel important. So very them focused. Um, and then how do you change people's minds? 12 ways to win people to your way of thinking. The first one is don't argue. Respect their opinions. Admit your errors quickly. Be friendly. Start with common ground. Let them talk. Understand their perspective. Be sympathetic. Dramatize your ideas or tell stories. Appeal to their nobler motives. Throw down a challenge, like invite them to accept some sort of challenge, and let them come to the idea themselves. Don't tell them the idea, but let them come to it by asking good questions and things. So when you think about these, a lot of these are interpersonal, like it's hard to not argue if you're not in a conversation. It's hard to respect their opinions if you're not listening to their opinions. And so when we think about our digital engagements, we think of it primarily in terms of broadcast. Like we got to get our message out there. We have to post every day. We've got to write more blogs. But none of these things talk about sharing your ideas often or loudly. These are about engaging and listening. And it's not called social broadcast. It's called social, or it's not called broadcast media. It's called social media. It needs to be a conversation. And so as you think about conversations, how do you intentionally foster conversation and listen to people on social media? Use social media to understand your audience and build relationship with them. Um, it sounds like a lot of work, and it is. But if you build a really powerful relationship by creating a memorable moment and you make someone feel known and loved, that person is going to become an advocate for you. They're going to become a champion. And it takes time to develop that relationship, just like a relationship in person. But I think you need to know that that's your goal. Because if you view social media as broadcast rather than a conversation, and you're not thinking in terms of building trust and winning friends, then your ability to engage and grow your audience is going to be crippled from the start. And so I think a lot of times we think about paid ads and paid paid things get you a lot of engagement, and there's a really linear relationship. The more money you invest, the more people will see your ad, the more people will come to your landing page or your website or your product page or your app, and that'll result in some percentage of more downloads. It's safe. It feels like predictable and reliable. But if you're doing an organic process, it's usually more exponential. It takes a lot longer. It's not as direct, but the audience that you grow authentically will start to multiply on your behalf and grow and attract others for you. And so, as soon as you cut off the funding on a paid ad, you're cutting off the traffic, and your engagement drops. But it's like if you're building an organic relationship with people and trust and winning people over, and like those people are with you for the long haul. Not to say you can't use paid. I'm just saying, if you're using paid without winning people in this way and building relationships, then growing your audience is going to be really challenging. So, what are some practical tools for how to build a meaningful experience? Um, this is one that I love. I use it all the time. It's called the experience map. And the experience map is something that you can do really easily on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, a spreadsheet, however you want to do it. But it has 5 phases: attraction, entry, experience, exit, and memory. So I would memorize these 2 along with those barriers that I mentioned earlier. But with experience map, attraction, a lot of times when we build experiences, like I'm going to use church as an example. You think about the preaching. It's the worship, the preaching, there's some announcements, like that's the experience of church. But we often miss out on some of these other categories. And I just want to caution you that these 5 phases of an experience will always exist, and they can either be intentionally designed or accidental. And so if they're accidental, it's likely not going to be very good. And so knowing these categories and planning for them intentionally is really powerful and gives you an edge. So for any experience, how are you attracting people? How do you get their attention? How do you make them want what you have to offer? And this goes back to what we were talking about, understanding their needs, understanding what their problem is. How are you solving it? Um, then there's the entry. So what does their welcome include? What does it look like for them to enter into this, to start? So with a church, maybe you have greeters, maybe there's there's coffee and donuts in the lobby. Like you're trying to make it a warm entry for them, that they feel welcomed. Then there's the experience, which is what we typically spend the most of our time thinking about. But then there's the exit. I know at my church growing up, an exit was always kind of awful. Like the parking lot was really crowded. We were, struggling to get our cars backed out and rushed out of the little exit thing. And so thinking intentionally about how do you make the exit strong? What are you sending them off with? How are you engaging them and making the way that they leave your experience memorable and powerful? And then the last one is memory. So how will you manage their recollection of the time spent with you? What do you want them to think about? What do you want them to take away from it? And when they think about it in the middle of their week, if you're using church, for example, like, is there something? Because they're going to remember it somehow. You can either be intentional about trying to shape the way that they remember it or not. The other another tool that's really powerful in helping to plan for how you want to engage your audience is called a journey map. This isn't supposed to be legible. I took it from an example that I had worked on for something at OneHope, and a journey map basically helps you understand what the full range of experiences is going to be in any particular journey that you want someone to take with you. And so someone might work through a journey over a period of years or months. Um, and what I find is having some sort of value development framework. So I have encounter, explore, engage, believe, and champion. So in the encounter category, these are going to be all of the ways that someone might hear about us for the very first time. In the explore, it's like if we've piqued their interest, they're interested, they want to learn more, what do we have available for them to start learning about us? in the engage category, like they're starting to take some sort of action. They're requesting something, or they're doing something to get more information or engage with us somehow. And so what are those things that are available to them there, and what's the path that you want them to take? um, and then as you get to believe, like, all right, they've started to buy into what we've offered. They've started to want to do more. They're signing up for larger engagements, longer term engagements. Like I would say, attending a webinar is a pretty high bar. You guys on this webinar are probably in the believe category in your Missio Nexus journey. And then there's champion at the very end. Like, what does full ownership look like? What are they sold out for? What do they want to do? And as you build this journey, you can sort of use arrows to plot from one step to the next. Like, where do I want someone who's in this category to go? So if someone lands on my website, what is the next thing that I want them to do? Is there a resource that I want them to do? Do I want them to sign up for something to become a member? Like, how do I know what the right next step is for this particular audience? And so planning out a journey and mapping out the connections between all the different things is just a really helpful exercise, because most of the time we have a ton of things. We've got a social media channel, a website, we've got different programs, we've got email campaigns, we've got conferences and webinars and all these things that are good, but they're usually disconnected, and there usually isn't a strategy or a pathway between them. And so being intentional and saying, everyone who comes to this webinar, this is what I hope that they would do next. Or everyone who comes to our website, this is the one thing I wish that they would come away with. So journey mapping is a really powerful tool, and there's a lot of resources on YouTube if you want to learn more about how to do that. And then I wanted to talk about some practical tools. So I've shared a few as we've gone through the experience map, journey mapping, but some practical tools to think about in terms of how to reach people and how to build this sort of engagement. So human-centered design, 4 helpful lists, and a prototype. So George Bernard Shaw says, progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. So I want you guys to be open and willing to start thinking about how to change your minds and how to change your approach. We bring a huge number of assumptions to everything that we do. Assumptions are just a part of life based on our experience, based on all of our expertise, maybe in your profession, your history, your culture. Everything about who you are is just built on all these assumptions that you've gathered over your life, and that's not a bad thing. But one of the challenges is when those assumptions are no longer true or not true of this situation. And so these tools that I want to share with you are essentially ways of challenging your assumptions. They're ways that help you embrace reality and operate in reality rather than what you wish reality was like, what you imagine reality to be like. So human-centered design, if you haven't heard of it, is a framework for testing ideas and building programs that work. I would recommend going to designkit.org. It's a lot of resources there about this, but they basically have 3 phases: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. And it usually organizations have some version of human-centered design that they use to build programs and products, but that's fine. OneHope has a 5-step process: design, do, document, dream. We have our 5 Ds that are very similar, built out but customized to our organization, but similar pathway: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. What's really powerful about human-centered design is that it helps you ground your the reason for why you're building something in people's real experiences. It gives you a lot of tools to interview and synthesize information from the field into the defense or the reason why you're building a program a certain way. And it moves you quickly from the phase of we're building this because we think it's a good idea to we're building this because we heard these stories in the field. We talked to this person and this was the need that they shared. Or as we engaged in this community and spoke with 12 different people in the exact area that we were working to engage, this was the issue that came up as most prevalent for them. And so we want to solve that. So like inspiration is all about sort of taking qualitative experiences and synthesizing a quantitative result that this experience or this need came up. And many times it's helpful because most of the time people can't tell you what they need. Like people wouldn't have said, I need an iPhone. But the fact that managing a computer that was large and a laptop and all these different things, that having an iPhone actually solved and consolidated a lot of technology into a handheld thing that was more convenient. Like people wouldn't have been able to say that concisely, but by understanding the needs and watching people and how they interacted with their environment, with the technology around them, it becomes really easy to start saying like, there's an opportunity for something here. So that's inspiration. Ideation walks through a lot of practical tools for thinking, for building prototypes, for testing ideas, and then implementation is all about how do we get this into the field? How do we scale it? How do we make it sustainable? And then I have these arranged in a line: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. But human-centered design would say it's much more cyclical. Like it should be something that continues, and that after implementation, you learn what you did wrong, and you go back to inspiration and ideation again. So it's a really powerful set of tools. I'd encourage you to learn more about it, and it serves as a good foundation for building out things. And then the next helpful tool is called Four Helpful Lists. Um, this is a really, really powerful tool. I use it all the time. I use it with my marriage when we're having a discussion about what we should do with something, or I use it with my team all the time. But basically, if you want to create a culture within your organization that is continually improving, that you are on a journey to make things better, and you want to do better engagement and audience growth, and you want to you attended this because you wanted to learn more about how to do effective communications. Four Helpful Lists is a powerful tool to get feedback from your team about not only what went well about their work, but also what's going well about how the team is working. What are the things that we could change? So the Four Helpful Lists is really simple to use. There's four lists that you want to make with your team. The first one is right, second is wrong, then missing, and lastly, confused. So right, wrong, missing, confused. So when you do Four Helpful Lists, I'd encourage you to do it often. Have a meeting with your team and say, let's do the Four Helpful Lists, guys. Let's talk about how this most recent initiative went, how this past couple of weeks of work went, how this most recent marketing campaign or webinar went, whatever it is that you're working on, to just get some input. So when it's right, what you're saying is, what are the things that went perfectly? They went really well. They added energy. They helped us get closer to our mission goal. Like those are all the positive things. For wrong, it's negative. Like, okay, this was a train wreck. This didn't happen. This was poorly executed. This fell apart. This drained the team. It took away energy. It didn't contribute to outcomes the way we thought it would. So that's wrong. Missing is like, there wasn't a person to handle this, or we needed instructions here. There was a missing piece in the process that we needed to add. And then confused is like, this was unclear. We didn't know what we were supposed to do here. This didn't make sense. People were confused. So those four categories, generally, what you want to try to do is you'll end the meeting with 4 we must statements. So for right, you want to say, we must optimize this. Like whatever that was right, we want to double down on that and do it more and strengthen it. For what was wrong, it's like, we must fix. Like we must fix this thing that went wrong. We want to change it. For missing, it's we must add. We must create that missing piece that we identified. And then confused is we must clarify. We want to clarify whatever that confusing thing was. And what this does is, if you do this every week, every 2 weeks, the following cycle, whatever that cycle is, if it's every 2 weeks, those 4 we must statements become work items for your team, so that the next cycle of work, hopefully whatever those things were that were wrong, missing, or confused, will start moving towards resolution. And the things that were right will hopefully get stronger. And using this is just a really simple and powerful tool to get feedback from your team and get people to feel heard, to feel known, and ultimately will go really far towards helping you better understand your audience, better understand yourself. As you run campaigns and you hear things like, I don't know, we thought this was the right direction, but the campaign we ran had really poor numbers, but this other one, this one page performed really well, and we're not sure why. Like, we want to understand that. Like, things will start coming up that help you improve the way that you're engaging your audience and understanding yourself and what you're doing. The last piece I want to share with you is prototypes. So with a prototype, I want you to memorize this mantra, and I want you to just keep it going in your head. Always be testing. Always be testing. The number one way to vet a bad idea is to test it. And if it doesn't work, then you know it was bad. I think I have a strong desire never to be seen as an expert. I don't ever want to be an expert in anything, because I shouldn't be the one who tells you how to market to your person, the person that you're trying to engage, your audience, because I don't know. I'm not the expert. They're the expert. They know what they want, and they're going to respond when you show it to them. And so if you put something in front of them and they don't like it, then that helps you get closer to the truth. So as quickly as you can go from idea to learning with a prototype, rather than building out the full thing. I was in a meeting just the other week, and someone was asking me, like, we want to build a whole new degree program, and we know we want to start with this one course, and we want to build this, and they're like, do you think this will work well in this market? You know, we've got these different considerations. I said, you should not build a course at all. Like, building a course and starting a degree program thing, like, that's a huge amount of work, and you're going to put hundreds of hours into developing that content, and just so that you can see if it's going to be well received in the market. Like, build a page or an advertisement or something that says, we're offering this course, even though the course isn't ready and launched yet. We're offering this course. Are you interested? Sign up for early access or something, and see if you get interest. And if you get interest, then build the course. If you don't get interest, then you've saved yourself 100 hours or so. So I think our typical response is that, oh, we should just jump straight into building, then we'll launch it, and then we'll learn. But the build launch phase, as you guys I'm sure know, always takes twice as long and is twice as expensive. And it results in a lot of frustration when you could have learned whether it would be successful much earlier on, much sooner, just by doing a prototype and testing first. So never be the expert. Always test your ideas, always build a prototype, and put it out in the field and see how they respond to it. The sooner you can get something in the customer's hand and hear from the customer what they think themselves of it, the better. There's a lot of things about prototypes. I would recommend a book called Sprint by Jake Knapp. It is a process for building a prototype in a week and launching it and getting customer interviews. And it's really powerful tool. I do sprints fairly often, and it's just really helpful to be able to take something that you think is the absolute best idea. This is going to be incredible. It's going to revolutionize everything. And you build a prototype of it and put it in the person's hands, and they're like, I would never use this. This doesn't serve me. What does this do? No, thanks. You know, it's like, then you're like, great. I'm glad we only spent 5 days on it rather than 5 months and $100,000. So you have to also be willing to take the time to build a prototype, because this is another one of those counterintuitive things where you're like, if we stop what we're doing and we build a prototype, like, we don't have time for that. We've got work to do. It's like, no. You're going to save yourself so much work by building a prototype rather than just jumping straight into building and launching. All right, that was a lot of words. I'm sorry for the fire hydrant of information. I am done. I'm going to turn it over to Q&A. What questions do you have? What was unclear? What can I help?
Thanks, Liam. I've got a couple of questions that have come in. And if others want to share questions, go ahead, you can put them in the chat. So this first one came from Grant. He asks, what does it look like in mission communication when your audience is donors, prospective missionaries, prayer partners, etc.? When the audience is so broad, how do you create personas narrow enough to connect with people?
Yeah.
And how do you craft blog content, social media engagement that connects with different stakeholders, but isn't so specific that it alienates other personas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like it's probably one that a lot of you guys are thinking. Um, you know, it's a challenge, but I would say you do really have to pick one. You have to pick the one that you are most about, like the one that most closely aligns with your why. And so when I think about, for instance, let's say you're running a program. I'll use Indigitous as an example. So Indigitous is, as Heather said at the beginning, we're about empowering believers to share their faith with technology. So everything that we need to do should be focused on the persona of the believer who we want to activate. That's what we need to be about. If a prospective donor comes and they see like, wow, look at what they're doing to empower believers, like they will see themselves aligning with the mission. And we need to be really laser crystal clear on the mission. And so like our content is focused on empowering believers to share their faith. That doesn't alienate people who are not believers looking to share their faith, like a prospective donor, or so because they're here for our why. Like if we're really clear on what we're about and what we're doing, and we're targeting our customer well, then when they see that content, they're like, yes, I love what they're doing. That's great. So I think at least for your public facing things, like you can really only speak to one audience, but you're going to attract people based on that why. And so um, I think it's hard in some cases when you're trying to like appease donors and reach donors, but I'd say like make a separate space for them or something. Like if there's something that's really for donors, like at the bottom have a thing that's for partners and it's like updates for them that's specific for them. But it's like your face, you only get one homepage, you only get one top blog hit. It's like those are the things where you really need to focus on your why and who your primary audience is. We all have multiple audiences, but you have to focus on your primary one. And if you're serving them well, others they're not going to fault you for that. They're not going to be like, we're not interested because they didn't write a blog post for me. Like they're interested because you're serving that primary audience so well. So yeah, I would say it's scary, it's hard, and it's like it makes you feel uncomfortable because you're like, no, we want to make sure that it's inclusive. But if you try to include a persona that's like, rural, third world country and wealthy first world potential donor, it's like those people don't even speak the same language literally. And it's like the way that you position yourself, you have to really be clear about who are we for. So I hope that helps. It is a challenge, and you have to do some hard work to make sure that when you make that change, you're communicating it well. Like who is your homepage for? Maybe when you're thinking about that user journey, when I look at this, it's like if my website is primarily not ever, like if the people I'm serving in my mission will never really land on my website, like we're serving them through something else that's like more direct or in the field, then it's like making your website for donor partners maybe is what you need to do. But that's why having a journey and understanding your personas and what they need is really helpful, because you can say, when a person in this category comes to us, this is the thing that we want to send them to. And so yeah, just having those pathways in mind is really helpful. Thanks for the question.
Liam, can you advance your slide just one more so we can have our contact information up on the screen?
Oh yeah. Let's see. I didn't add that one. Let me get it for you in just 1 second.
All right, and we do have one other question from Curtis.
Okay.
I'll post it here in the chat for you. Curtis asks, how does an organization go about getting accurate information about their audience's felt needs? I've been in meetings where everyone has an idea about what the needs are, but are there concrete steps to get accurate information on an audience?
It's a great question. I think, so two things I would say to that. One is that you should have a dialogue with your audience. Like, you should have people who represent the voice of your audience and are regularly interacting with them. And if that's possible, then you should really strongly listen to them. And a lot of times what I do with something like a sprint where we're building a prototype and testing it is we actually talk to youth. Like, we invite teens and children into our office, and we show them the prototype and talk to them and hear their needs. And we ask a lot of questions about what they care about, how they view this particular project. And so I think as much as you can, really engage with them directly. And if that's really hard, if you're engaging them with social media, how are you listening to them and really sharing? I don't know, you have to create space in your organization to listen to them. And so what human-centered design would do is human-centered design would have you in the field, like talking to them, interacting with them in their context, and really putting yourself in their shoes and in their setting. And it's like, it is expensive, like, to go to a country and interact with them directly. And it's also potentially difficult in times of COVID. But we had an opportunity, for instance, to do a partnership with another organization. And OneHope didn't know really how, like, what would this look like? They wanted to partner with us on something, and we didn't understand the setting of, like, how what they wanted from us would fit with what they were doing in the field. And so someone from my team went. They attended one of the trainings that they were doing. They attended several of the group events that they were having that they wanted us to participate in. They interviewed pastors, family attendees, and so it was really just like talking to them and knowing them and taking good notes and taking pictures and videos and then bringing that back and saying, okay, let's learn from this. What do we learn from this about? So I guess the concrete steps to get accurate information on your audience is to go and talk to them, engage with them, have avenues built into your organization and into your process where you're really regularly listening to and engaging and getting feedback and input. Great question.
And anyone else has any questions? There's still a chance to do that. You can post them in the chat. Liam, this has been great. Very good information. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
There is another question from Emily Roth. How can you move audience from passive consumer to active engagement? How do we go from broadcast to two-way conversation? Great question, Emily.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we don't give people an opportunity to engage. I think one thing that we're learning at OneHope is what are you counting as engagement? Really defining what engagement means for you. So, for instance, on that journey map I showed, there was a section called engagement, and YouTube was all the way in the encounter phase. So YouTube was an area where people might stumble across us randomly because of the content we publish. But if I had someone who was a subscriber and a regular commenter who watched every single thing that I put on YouTube, but they never took any other steps, would you count them as engaged? Because they hadn't moved to that part of the journey yet. I think it's challenging to define what do you count as engaged? What do you want them to do? And then really intentionally providing opportunities for them to do that. So, for instance, a friend of mine does a daily email, and it's called Marketing Manna. And I learned, or Daily Manna, Marketing Manna. Anyways, it's a really great daily email that talks about marketing and how to communicate well. And in that email, he always asks a question. He's like, please write back to me. I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are about this or something related to the content that he shared. And so it's he's soliciting that feedback, and he's asking for it and creating a call to action. And I think your conversions will always be really low. There's like a 99-1 ratio. It's like 90% of the people that you engage will just probably be passive listeners. 9% will be like occasional contributors, like they engage somewhat, and then 1% will be really heavily engaged and engaging frequently. And so as you think about that, those ratios, they kind of hold true on YouTube. If you look at like the number of views to the number of thumbs ups or thumbs downs to the number of comments, like it kind of follows that same ratio. But I think you really have to ask for it, and you really have to work for it, because you're only going to get about 10%, only about 1% are going to heavily engage. But those people who do engage are really valuable, and it's worth cultivating. And I think, moving from passive consumer to active engagement, you have to put out content that really invites that kind of engagement. I think many times I'll write a blog, but I don't have an intentional next step in mind. And it's like, I just wrote this, I hope it's helpful. And like, that's for sure never going to get any engagement. But it's like, if I'm creating something that offers value and creates an opportunity, a memorable experience, something that there is a really clear next step from, then you'll have a lot more luck. But it just takes work, and it takes experimentation. So those 4 helpful lists and like the journey maps and all those things, those are helpful ways to like, let's test this. Our goal is to create engagement. This is our experiment that we think will create engagement. So we're going to try it. Did it work? Why or why not? What can we learn from it? Now let's try another experiment. So you have to think of it like being a scientist. Like, test your hypotheses and iterate to try to get a better understanding of your audience, what they care about, what they will respond to, what are the messages that will activate them. I read a recent study about a promotion strategy to get people who are season ticket holders to attend a sports game. And they said they tried 2 advertisements. One was exhorting them that they were using quotes from the athletes saying how much the home court advantage helped them, that like having the cheering fans there was just like super impactful. And the attendance after that promotion was like 1 or 2%. Like it didn't change the attendance. When they did a different ad, they said, "Are you going to be at the game?" It's just a question. No, like exhortation, nothing like that. It was just like a question. Are you going to be at the game on Saturday? And like participation jumped hugely. And so as you think about that, you don't know what's going to work. And so you really just have to experiment and try and test. So great question.
Thanks, Liam. Thank you very much for what it is you shared with us today. I think, yes, we're switching back over to our announcements. This webinar has been recorded and will be available to Missio Nexus members on the Missio Nexus website. When you exit the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a very short evaluation. We value your input, so please fill it out. It should take you only a minute or so to do. Be sure to check out our next communications webinar, which I will be presenting at the same time on April 6th, entitled How to Tell Dangerous Stories. Until then, I encourage you to consider joining the Communications Director and Staff cohort, which you can find in the menu on the Missio Nexus website under the program menu, and then select cohorts there. This will enable you to connect with other mission agency staff engaged in marketing and communications. I've also posted a link to it in the chat, which you'll find there. Thank you to everyone who joined and participated with us. If you'd like to get in touch with Liam or I, our email addresses are in the chat. You can grab those real fast. I'm Heather Pubels, along with Mary Kay, our producer.